Hey everybody, it's Booksy here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about what we learned today, um, and maybe what it means going forward. But I just want to quickly address a couple things that I've noticed over the last few days. So first, I joined YouTube. I just want everyone to know that I joined it because I was having trouble explaining what I found. And when you're doing things in pictures and text messages, really hard to sort of visualize and to understand. I can't point to something and say, look, there it is. Like I have to draw diagrams and arrows and words, and it's just a lot of work. So my purpose of getting on here wasn't to, I've said it before, really not to make a name for myself or um, build some kind of a following. If people enjoy the work that's being done, and I think people do enjoy it and they want to see more, then it's something I'll consider. But, for me, I didn't come on to be like an entertainer. I came on to just be an informer and to like let you all know what I found so that you can take it and apply it as you see it. And maybe, especially take it a step further, or there's people who can take it a step further. And when we look at these fractals, we're really just describing. And here's the key, right? This is what kind of opened my brain to really understand this language that I found with this particular stock, and some others, but specifically with this is that fractal patterns appear all over the place. They're just not usually that consistent, meaning they don't just repeat in the same order over and over again. But they very often are found repeating, if that makes sense. And all a fractal indicates is that this is a particular way that large money is trading a stock. So that's it. It's like behavior analysis, basically, for the stock market, and trying to interpret what each of these moves, each of these sections is meant to represent. I mean, it's simple. You could say, yeah, accumulation, distribution, right? I mean, they're buying more calls and shares down here. They're selling stuff up here. This is not rocket science, right? And so the point of the fractal isn't to say we know exactly what's going to happen next. It's more, what are these institutions trying to do in this section, right? Versus this section, versus this section, versus this section. And I think that helps us to better understand maybe the end goal, of all of this. Like, if you're involved in this, you want to know what this is coming to. And we can go more into that later. I think we need to, but I just wanted to say that's the reason that I'm looking at these things. I don't really care if I were to call out a certain price action and it didn't come about. That's not as important as learning, um, and interpreting the why behind it. That to me is the most important thing right now. So because honestly, I think even if, and I think we will, if we see a lower point tomorrow, this is kind of where I'm going, right? I think if we see a lower point tomorrow, I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. And I think you'd still, even if I didn't know this fractal at all, like I would still think this is going to be some kind of an inverse head and shoulders setup. Like that's the way I would interpret it, right? And I think that's pretty close to what we're going to see. But so you don't need the fractal to understand that. And I think that's another thing is just a lot of people have said, well, don't you see this wedge or don't you see that wedge and all these other things? And it's like, yeah, I see these things, but I just don't care. Like, it's not important to me. Like, I'm not interested in tracking one head and shoulder. Like, okay, so what? That doesn't help me understand the motive, right, behind the price action. Um, it just kind of gives me a technical pattern that I can brag about, right? Which is frankly kind of pointless. Um, so that being said, let's get into it real quick. So here we have what the price action today, and if you look at it from this point of view, this doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? And I heard from somebody on, I think it was on Twitter, and I don't recall who it was, I apologize, but basically they were saying, well, don't you think this right here, this falling out, is the same as this right here, this falling out? And when I look at it from this point of view, I have to kind of to nod and say, well, you might be right. You know, maybe this isn't the T's at all. Maybe we haven't even seen them yet. Um, but then I look at like the T1, right, and the volume level at the T1 and the volume level at the T2, and I see here just some consistency, okay, in the amount of volume. And then in addition to that, you look at what we've been staring at, right, which are these chart patterns. And the fractal, in my mind, is like made up of kind of three things. It's made up of like direction. So which direction are we going, down or up? Really simple. The visual, what does this look like? Why we have a certain kind of a U here, right? Like what do these represent? Okay, and there's a lot of these kinds of things. Okay, but what do these represent? And then lastly, the volume. And the volume is kind of driving everything. So the reason that I don't think you can look at this and say, this is all not part of T2, you would have to say, like, first of all, you'd have to say this breakout was just random. It was meant to be inside here somewhere, right? And then all this bleeding out is this section. And then you'd have to then say, well, now we're going to start, you know, the T1, T2, and all that stuff. And, you know, you look at this and you look at it, you stare at it long enough, you're going to see maybe it's the same, right? And this is where things get tricky. But, you know, at the same time, I mapped this action and I saw this action, this A, B, C, D all the way through here. I got rid of my numbers so you won't be able to see it. I'm sorry. Poor preparation. But this right here, you know, this was the E, right? This was the C. This was the B. Okay, and you can see the price action, right? You can see it does the same things. It goes from D to E, from like D to E. And when you zoom in, you can see there's a double bottom right there. Like it was absolutely trackable, and I did track it. And when we got to the end, we were at like M right here, and then this ended up being N down here. All right, and the hard thing is that when these things are variable speed, all right, and I'm just telling you all this so that you're aware, like what my thinking is when I'm looking at them, is that you have to take everything on different time frames and just sort of look at it, comparing it to different time frames on like previous cycles to sort of help you better see what's maybe going on. Okay, because it might look more accurate comparing 1 to 5 if we're sped up. So that being said, you know, when I look at, I'll go back to the 3-minute actually on this one, and this is 5-minute. When I look at this price action right here, I absolutely feel like this is the T1. This massive volume spike, okay, you can see the shape. I mean, it's almost identical, okay, and it happens towards the later half. We'd already exited this one so early, right? I really do think this was the first liquidity test, and I think the violent nature of it, right, followed by the violent sell-off. If you look, it's just very similar, okay? Very, very similar. And that's why I thought this must be it. And then when you go to here, we talked about the T2 being this plot twist, because I thought it was originally this, and I was really confused. And then I was like, oh no, I see it now. There's this U shape, right? And it's hard to see, but you can kind of track it. And then afterwards, you get this sell-off. Now, this is where things got confusing, and this leads us up to today. So 10 minutes, I know, and we're already back to today. So I said, at first I looked at this and I thought, okay, it ricocheted off of this blue wedge. Now, why did I say that? Because I was starting with the assumption, and you have to call it what it is. I mean, it's an assumption because we don't know. And I was looking at it and I was saying, well, maybe, maybe this is kind of one of those things where it's testing the bottom and the top of the wedge. And so right here, I thought, well, that's a test of the top. Maybe it needs to come and test the bottom. And it did. All right, I considered this kind of the test of the bottom. It tested other things, but this was kind of like where I was. All right, I'm going to delete this real quick so you can see a little better because I have two triangles there. So I thought maybe this was it, right? And then it could continue. It did not. It kept going. And so then I had to say, well, why would it keep going? This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Um, and I looked at this price action and this doesn't tell me anything. The only thing this tells me is that from the T2, it tried to after it, finished the test, I guess, it went over and it found this trend line. And I was like, well, it can't be that because then it's going to be this trend line right here, right? Which, I mean, in a way, it is, I think. This is the trend line, and we don't want to call it that, but that's what it is. It did what it was supposed to do, right? It just that I thought it was going to be like here. So I was wrong, and then I was also right, but I was also wrong, right? It can happen simultaneously. It's like the premise of what I was saying was correct, but my estimation of where it was way off. But so I had to ask, like, okay, why did it need to drop? And I know that other people were calling on it for technical reasons, right? Fibonacci retracements, for rising wedges and all this other nonsense. Like, I was like, okay, fine. Like, it needs to drop, but why on the T2? Why on the T's? Why in this section? When I'm expecting these liquidity tests, and I know that we're doing accumulation, so that could be one big reason, okay, is that we need to do accumulation. But there's another reason, and it's kind of glaringly obvious, and I missed it. And it's pretty simple, right? If you go back and you look at the T's, I mentioned that they do establish a bottom, which is respected later, but they also always come down to touch. And that's like the simplest thing, right? But they do. They actually always come down. At least in the last few months, they've always come to go to the 1 hour so you can see. Yeah. So where were our t-tests, right? Where were they located? Well, the very first one was right here. I don't know why my numbers are way off. I think I put them on a different time frame. This is the first t-test. These are the second ones. These are the third ones. So it goes to reason that the fourth ones would have to hit the bottom as well. And that, again, makes me think, well, is my hypothesis wrong? Like, did this drop? Is this actually just the drop? Are we going to see a prolonged t-test down bottom? And the answer is right now, I don't know. If you were to look at this back when this was happening, this is a long time. It's played out over like 2 weeks. And it would have been really difficult at the time to say you knew where the tops and the bottoms were going to be as it played out. So I'm going to take a wait and see approach, but I think this is still just the T2 drop. And I called it kind of midday because I was looking at this area. So let's go take a look. And we're actually almost done with the video for today. Basically, what I want to do is just show you what I saw. So when I was looking over here, I'm going to have to keep scrolling around. I don't know if you can hear my son, he's singing Smash Brothers. He's in the room next door. He's supposed to be going to bed. He's not. I looked at this and I saw a sort of a 1, 2, and a 3. All right. And it may be easier to see on the 3 minute, but I saw this sort of drop where it goes down 1, it comes up pretty hard, down 2, up pretty hard, 3. So when I looked at this, I thought that we had that, and to a degree we did, right here. See that? 1, 2, 3. That's why I thought this was the end of the t-test. Plus, you know, if you look at where the t1 came down, it stood to reason that maybe we just were going to wedge up here and go. But then I saw it bleeding down, so I looked at and I saw that, yeah, every time we've had t-tests, it's come to the bottom of the particular trading pattern for the most part, or it's created the bottom, I should say. So then I went and looked at, whoopsie, that's fine. So then I went and looked at this one. I went back further to a previous, this is like abysmally tall, there we go. I went back to a previous cycle, holy moly, and turn off auto. I went here, and these are very distinct because they're very spread out. Big drop, consolidation, big drop, consolidation, big drop, consolidation. So here we have another t-test that looks like, you know, kind of goes to nowhere. So I looked at what is this trying to connect to, and this is what I found, okay, that it connects to essentially areas of support before we had the head and shoulders. And you see it here, okay, and now we're seeing it here. So there's 3 places we can look. First, 1, right below the B4, areas of support. 2, right below the B4, areas of support. Right, 3, areas of support. So if that's all we knew, then we could say that probably it's gonna sort of touch down, you know, and it looks a lot like this one right now, because it landed right here. You see that weird little drop, kind of extreme drop before the bottom of this wedge. It did land there, right? And it created a pretty hard bounce. And then at the end of the day, I said, well, maybe, you know, maybe this is what the T's are all about. They're about this region that we tested. And then this is actually the catch. This is not anything. I thought originally this was some kind of important thing, and it does catch on the way up, like vertically. But now I'm starting to think, and I thought it was also important because I thought this line mattered, right? Because I thought the T's were testing this line. But now I'm starting to think the T's don't care about this at all. They may sometimes retrace these regions and these levels, but they're really looking at this, which is the initial drop. And then this is how they get us to kind of, they pump and dump right on these head and shoulders, and they get it to turn around, and then this is the catch before it traverses this region. Let's check that out. And this was my new hypothesis, and here's it again. It's a hard dip, and then it kind of consolidates, and then we get this kind of pump dump type head and shoulders, and then we test these regions, right, that we quickly moved through before because of high volume volatility. Now it's been shook out, right? And now we're retesting those regions. So, does it need to come all the way down? Well, the short answer is no, I don't think it does, but it might. And I'm looking at this, and what I saw today was that there was a 1, 2, 3 in here. I see a 1, 2, and a 3 right here. So the fractal is playing out like it wants to, but it's just repeating the same phenomena over and over, right? So there's your 1, 2, 3, and there was another one up in here, okay? And then on the macro, and let's get out of this view. On the macro, you have a 1, 2, and then we're looking for a 3. You see that? Now this is a 15-minute, let's go to the 5-minute. Ignore this move. Just look at the top and the bottom of this channel, okay? Just the top and bottom of the channel that was established. All right, I think that this is a fake out, and I was joking at the end of the day. I said, "What in the world?" I just kind of went, I laughed, and I was like, "What is this nonsense?" Like there was this huge spike at the last minute, and I think it's made to kind of, honestly, I think it's probably a bull trap because the only way this makes any sense as the third is if it were to do this, like one, two, and this was the third right here. But it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And as other people have pointed out, and I pointed out earlier, that this actually works really well because if you look at this right here, what would this give us, right? It's almost like too perfect, right? It gives us a 1, right, a 2, and then a 3. So does this fit with the hypothesis that it wants to test these regions of support from this region back here? Yes. Does it have a 1, 2, 3 up top? Yes. Does it have 1, 2, 3 in the middle? Yes. Does it have 1, 2, 3 at the end? Yes. And then the macro is a 1, 2, and a 3. This would mean that quite possibly, and I know this is, for some people, they're looking at it, they might just say, well, that's just a walk down. And I would say, yeah, exactly right. But the repetition of the fractal is what concerning to me, right? And that they extended this because maybe there was a lot of pressure to keep this thing going up and they really just needed to go. So this is one option. The other option is that, so if that were to happen, sorry, let's finish that one out. If that were to happen, we base down here, maybe going into, maybe this is really drawn out and we don't really see a move, but it's just kind of flat. And then we come up, we test like 41 or something, we get our T3, and then we get our R1, okay? And this would be maybe Friday. Not sure. Tomorrow it's like a day off, and then Friday's like a half day, so who knows? And I know options are kind of a big part of this, so they may knock it below 40, I think was max pain or something like that, or 41. So it would make sense that this would be what happens, maybe something like this. All right, and this would be our T3 followed by the R1. Another option, which I don't really agree with, but this was brought up, it's a possibility, is that for some reason this bounces up, then comes back down, and then goes. I don't like this option because, first of all, if it did this, I'd be pretty confused because we didn't get to this lower test. And then we'd end up having to do it all over again, and this would end up being the T3, and the T3 just doesn't look like this almost ever. The T3 is always kind of like, you see this? It's like a plateau from which you launch to R1. It just always is, and I'm not just blowing steam, right? I'm very confident about this one because the T3 is unique. All right, this is the T3 right here. See this? This just doesn't look like it would drop all the way back down. This, however, has in the past. So, the T3 is just, it is what it is. I don't see it being this kind of major, I see it kind of as like a stepping stone to the R1, but it's part of the T's, I think, because it's sort of the exiting of this session. The other option is that one that the person on Twitter was saying is that this hasn't even started. If that were the case, I'd have to reevaluate like everything. This wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me at all. I'll be just frank. Like this wouldn't make any sense to me. I just don't. I don't see it. Maybe you could say it was this, but then like, what is this? Is all this? Like, I don't know. And we tracked it. It was pretty one-to-one with this. It looked just like it. So um, basically, I think this whole region right here should be thought of as the catch. And I don't even know if it's worth drawing a wedge anymore. It typically does wedge as it's about to break down. And sometimes this line like is respected later, but I think I'm going to call it the catch now. Because that's what it does, is catching that downward action before it starts walking down through these areas. I think this is the T1. I think this is the T2. I think this is extended. If it's not, then whatever. We get down here, we would do a T1, It could happen fast. This could be the T2, maybe like up to the next level or something. And then T3 would be set up for like Monday, maybe. This would help them keep their options, right? And then, I mean, that's possible. I guess we'll know when it happens, you know? I personally think that if you look at just how much to take this thing down, I mean, it's just unlike anything we've really seen. Because we're at the top of the channel here, it's just been like a pressure cooker pushing, 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 like you're ready to go. And it just took like a lot, you know, to keep this thing down. I just don't see it. I think it's more likely we get one more leg down. We probably go sideways. Maybe we come up pretty hard and then we sort of do this business. And then we basically kind of walk back up, and then we end up having our maybe on Friday we get to the thing, but then Monday maybe we go. I think that's more likely. I know this, to most people this looks very much the same, but this is kind of the way I've seen it play out, right? And I don't see it being this like really prolonged up and down movement. And another reason for that is just these futures dates, like we're right on it. And typically we've seen runs basically right on it. So if I had to make a guess, they're trying to get, I mean, that's right on T3. This one was actually not, but it was still, it was like huge, right? This was a huge part of this. And I just don't see a whole lot of delay here. Like it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I think it's got to be soon, or else it's going to miss that kind of rush that it gets. So I just don't see this. This doesn't look right to me. I think we're basically done. I think it's just ready to go. It's just taking a little bit extra time because they want to retrace and retest these levels. And yeah, hit the bottom, sure. It's fine. It's fine with me as long as it goes, right? So yeah, anyways, I hope this was helpful. And I hope you're not worried too much about the price action today. I didn't see it coming, but you know, we learn from our failures. And the good thing about this is that we did learn maybe more about the T's and like what it is that's going on right before these R1s that happen. And this could be very, very helpful later on in like mapping this thing. And we also learned about the catch, you know. I'm going to call it that right now. Because I think that before I was really preoccupied with this being some kind of wedge pattern, and it kind of is. But if we think about it more like it's going to catch on these lower values, it makes a little more sense. So, all right, that's all I got. Y'all have a good one.